Republican Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, one of only 7 Republicans who voted to convict Donald Trump in his impeachment for attempting to overturn the 2020 election. Senator Cassidy, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. I want to start by getting your reaction to Donald Trump's comments about a bloodbath. Do you think that those comments were appropriate?
Two things about that. The general tone of the speech is why many Americans continue to wonder, should President Trump be president? That kind of rhetoric, it's always on the edge, maybe doesn't cross, maybe does, depending upon your perspective. I also think, though, that the mainstream media contributes to it. If you take the one about the bloodbath, which arguably could be about an economic bloodbath, not about kind of street violence related to the election, then it gives his defenders something to focus on as something which was distorted. So, yes, he always walks up to the edge on that rhetoric. And again, that's why people are concerned. But sometimes the mainstream media, whether they want to or not, can't resist, and they go just a little bit too far, which distracts from what could be the impact.
And just to be very clear, you're saying it walks up to the line. Does that comment, even if in the context, that broader backdrop of talking about the auto industry, does it cross a line for you? You heard what the Biden administration said. They say it's another sign that he's using terms related to political violence.
Well, that's their perspective. They've got a candidate who also doesn't seem fit for office. But you could also look up at the definition of bloodbath, and it could be an economic disaster. And so if he's speaking about the auto industry in particular in Ohio, then you can take it a little bit more context. That's why I say you walk up to the line. Depending upon the perspective, somebody is going to interpret it. He's running against Biden, so Biden's going to say it's about political violence. His defenders want to defend him, and so they're going to say it's about economic disaster. There's always just that little bit of tension there, which allows a dispute about the interpretation as opposed to the kind of general sort of, is this the person we want to have in office?
And what about his comments that undocumented immigrants, not all of them are people? What does it say about the Republican Party that the presumptive GOP nominee is using that kind of language, sending that message?
Let me say first, he was speaking about the possibility of criminals being among the immigrants. And those are the people he was saying may not be people, if you will. On the other hand, clearly, the president's rhetoric has reflected poorly in terms of regarding folks who are coming here illegally, and they shouldn't be, but in a dehumanizing fashion. And that's why, again, many people continue to have reservations. And I say the best thing going for Donald Trump running for president is that he's running against Joe Biden, about whom many people also have reservations. And frankly, that's why people are considering third parties. So it's a sorry state of affairs.
Well, let me ask you about some recent comments he made about January 6th. He said on the first day of a second term, he would, quote, free those who've been charged and convicted with January 6th and committing crimes related to January 6th. Do you think that's appropriate, that people who've been convicted, in many cases have pled guilty, should be pardoned?
I do not think it's appropriate. We're a nation of laws, and those folks were convicted. Many times they pled guilty. If you plead guilty, i.e., obviously you are not a patriot, you're somebody who committed a criminal act. So I think that would be a wrong signal if you're the chief executive and you're responsible for enforcing the laws.
Senator, you know, it's interesting. When you became one of those who voted to convict former President Trump in his second impeachment, you said, our Constitution and our country is more important than any one person. Do you believe that former President Trump would follow the Constitution in a second term?
Now, that is a hypothetical, which is hard for me to kind of go at. And frankly, Kristen, that's the kind of question that people ask, almost begging an answer. All I can say is that we have checks and balances within our system that if any one person attempts to act in an unconstitutional fashion, that they can be theoretically checked. I'll also point out that Joe Biden has acted in an unconstitutional fashion when he attempted to forgive student loans, and it was stopped in the Supreme Court. He found a workaround. I'm not sure the workaround is constitutional, but nonetheless, we have checks and balances. So I'm not defending the former president, but if you present me with that theoretical, I have to answer it in the context of how our government works.
But, Senator, can you really draw an equivalency between a legal battle over student loans and the idea that he tried to overturn a free and fair election? I mean, my question relates to, of course, what happened on January 6th. And I didn't hear you say, yes, that you have confidence that he would defend the Constitution.
So I'm not establishing equivalency at all. Period. End of story. There is not. But I can't theoretically say in the hypothetical that Trump's going to do one thing or the other. But I'm not establishing equivalency between January 6th and what Biden has done.
Let me ask you about former Vice President Mike Pence. As you know, he made a lot of headlines at the end of this week when he came out and said he's not going to endorse his former boss, Donald Trump. It comes as a number of Trump critics, from Mitch McConnell to Chris Sununu, Brian Kemp, have said they are going to endorse Donald Trump. I know you've gotten this question a lot, but now that he's the presumptive nominee, I have to ask, will you endorse Donald Trump, Senator?
I'm smiling because this keeps my streak unbroken on Meet the Press, where I'm asked a question, either this or similar to that. In fact, my staff had an over-under as to how long it would take. At this point, all I will say is that I plan to vote for a Republican for the presidency of the United States.
Well, I have to continue the streak and ask you a couple of follow-ups to try to get an answer out of you, Senator. Just again, will you endorse him?
Well, you have an answer.
Are you ruling it out? I didn't hear you say, yes, you're going to endorse him.
Again, no, the answer I'm going to give, and the answer I've given consistently whenever asked on this on Meet the Press, is that I plan to vote for a Republican for the presidency of the United States.
You haven't endorsed him yet. Do you have any plans?
And I've answered this question so many times before, by the way. I've answered this question so many times before. Every show wants it on their show. But anyway, that's my answer.
I hear you. This week's a little different because he did just become the presumptive nominee. So you don't have any plans right now to endorse him. You plan to endorse and vote for, as you say, a Republican. Will you vote for Donald Trump? Or are you going to write in a name?
Really good, Kristen. But I plan to vote for a Republican for the presidency of the United States.
You're not going to tell us. Would you rule out voting for Donald Trump? Let me ask you that. Is it off the table for you?
You know, I think, yeah, you're kind of beating a dead horse right now. I've been very explicit in what my answer is. And I've answered this in greater detail in times past. And so I'm just going to stay where I just said. I plan to vote for a Republican for the presidency of the United States.
All right. Let me ask you this. You have not closed the door publicly on a third-party run. We've learned that No Labels does, in fact, plan to run a candidate. Have you been approached by No Labels? And is there any chance that you would run on a No Labels ticket?
You know, I was never seriously considered to be their candidate. It was reported in the press otherwise, but I was never seriously considered. So that kind of, obviously, the answer is not. On the other hand, the very fact that No Labels that was floated, I will say, has a certain rationale to it. People in No Labels actually want answers to serious problems in our country. And right now, neither candidate is actually offering serious solutions. You've heard me speak about Social Security before. Neither candidate is offering something which has a snowball's chance of passing Congress, and yet Social Security will become insolvent in about 8 years. So wait, it's going insolvent in 8 years, and neither candidate is offering a solution which has a snowball's chance in Hades in order to get him passed. So the very fact that I speak about that means that, wait a second, this might be somebody whom we would consider because this person is talking about serious answers to serious problems.
Just to be
I'll
very
point
clear
out, by the way, that if Social Security goes insolvent, there'll be a 24% cut in benefits for everybody receiving it. That's why it's so serious.
We're getting to Social Security right now, but just to be clear, you're not running on a No Labels ticket. I just want to be clear about that.
I'm not.
Okay, let's get to Social Security. You say neither candidate has a plan. Biden has put forward a plan. Part of that would be raising taxes on businesses, large corporations. On Monday, Donald Trump said he would be open to cutting Social Security. He walked those comments back. But do you think that Trump can be trusted on the issue of Social Security, to protect Social Security?
define and protect Social Security. Neither candidate has put up a plan that will prevent the mandatory 24% cut in benefits when the trust fund goes bankrupt. And by the way, Biden's plan, he's already proposed $4.2 trillion on wealthier Americans, and now he's going to tax them again for this. At some point, you could confiscate the wealth of wealthier Americans, and you wouldn't achieve everything that he's saying that he's going to do. This is kind of like his go-to. I'm going to tax wealthier Americans to fill in the blank. It's just not practical the way he's proposing it, but it gives them a talking point. People want to move beyond talking points. They want actual answers. We're not getting them.
Senator, part of your plan involves an investment fund, and the challenge and the criticism is that would that not pose serious risks to investors, essentially leaving Social Security to the chance of the market, the stock market?
No, in our proposal, we actually created a trust fund separate from an investment fund separate from the Social Security Trust Fund. So no risk is borne by the beneficiary. She is going to be able to, we're going to repeal that law that says she gets a 24% cut, and we'll use the money here to offset whatever borrowing is required to pay her in her benefits until it's fully kind of accounted for. And so we actually know exposure. And if you look at the stock market returns since 1929, it's averaged 8.5% return. And so, yeah, there might be some time in the future where it dips down, but history shows that it increases back up. And by the way, this is what every pension fund almost in the world does, except for Social Security. We need to follow best practices.
Senator, before I let you go, I have to ask you about the House-backed bill on TikTok, which effectively requires the Chinese-owned company ByteDance to sell it or face a total ban of TikTok in this country, which has been deemed a national security threat. Will you vote for this in the Senate if it comes to the floor for a vote?
I'd like to see the final language, but I'm certainly predisposed to vote for it. Anyone that doesn't think that the Chinese Communist Party would like to influence how we think in our country just doesn't understand what they do. They have members of the board of directors. The Chinese Communist Party has members on the board of directors of ByteDance, the parent company of this. And in previous times, the federal government has required the sale of a Chinese social media company over these sorts of national security concerns. And so I think this is consistent with what we've done in the past, and by and large, I support it.
All right. Senator Cassidy, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it.